Warning. Don't watch this channel now unless you can handle the truth. Always pursuing truth. Bring you topics of truth for you to view and peruse and pursue. So, are you ready? And can you handle the truth? Well, I sure hope so, folks. I have a very special guest here who's going to be playing right before Thanksgiving on November 22nd. And that's a day in infamy, I guess, happened back in '63. I guess Robert Morningstar is well versed in, he's done a lot of research on all kinds of topics, including everything from UFOs to JFK and beyond. And so, Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think about these new recent editions, releases, I guess, of all these documents and how that helps us understand what really happened back then.
I'm very happy. I'm very gratified by the release of the files. I don't feel really that we need that. We don't need any more, honestly. There are millions of Americans and hundreds of thousands of JFK researchers over the last 54 years, and we've put together an accurate picture of what happened, and we've figured out all the skullduggery and the trickery and the optical illusions that were used to foist the Warren Commission report on us. And it's very much like the Munchkins coming awake when the curtain has been drawn back from the Wizard of Oz. We see that all of it has been smoke and mirrors and illusions and intentional deception. I call it disinformation technology. My first contribution to the JFK assassination research is I exposed the doctoring of the Zapruder film, and I explained how it was done using a very sophisticated form of psychology called Gestalt psychology. I was fortunate enough to go to Fordham University at a really great time in the history of communications. And as a result, I was able to learn and be educated in one of the finest schools in America, but also one of the best psychology departments in America. And in the course of those studies, I studied many courses in psychology, but the most important one I have to say was the course in human learning, which is where I learned Gestalt psychology. And what I'd like to do now is start sharing my screen with you so that I can show you in graphic detail.
Can you handle it, folks? There we go.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a few frames from the Zapruder film.
Okay.
And explain to you
psychology
in this sequence how an optical illusion was created. So here we go. This is a composite image that I drew up of 3 sequential frames of the Zapruder film. A geometric proof of Gestalt editing of the Zapruder film to create the illusions of the JFK assassination. So the first discrepancy actually is, you notice the numbers here, Z207, and then we lose 5 frames and it's Z212, and there are splice marks, and here to Z313. So here's the problem. These are being run through the projector at 18 frames per second and on video at 30 frames per second. So your eyes, or most eyes, are not fast enough to catch this illusion that has been created. First of all, let me blow up this first frame and show you something. Okay, this is what I mean by Gestalt. Right? When the brain organizes information, you know, your eyes look at something, you first create a horizontal plane and a vertical plane, and then you start to classify and categorize all the items in your reality according to that matrix. So knowing that this is how the human mind conceives an idea or a perception, Gestalt psychology codified how humans get an idea or see something and extract information from it. So in this first frame, I want to show you that the alignment of this pergola porch over here, this edge, that's the purpose of this line, to show you that it's in line with this, generally in line with this post that's holding up the sign. Now the car is coming in, and here is Jackie's bonnet. That's Jackie Kennedy's bonnet. And President Kennedy's over here. He's behind the sign. Now, Zapruder said that when he was shooting the film, the car came behind the sign, it stopped, and he saw the president rise up, as if I sat up in my chair, jumped up and said, "Oh my God, I've been shot," which is precisely what he said. According to the Secret Service men, they heard him say that. So his head popped up above this sign, and then he fell back down, and Zapruder testified to that before the Warren Commission. So they couldn't show that. The doctors of the editors cut out that whole sequence where you would have seen President Kennedy rise up. He said, Zapruder said he saw his red head pop up and its shoulders and then pop back down. That would have taken quite a few frames, many more than 5. The excuse is they damaged the film and removed 5 frames. So this is the first discrepancy, but the car actually stopped. And what we see in the Zapruder film is a smooth running car at about 30 miles an hour. And so how did they do that? Well, they cut out all the frames where President Kennedy popped up and then popped down. But the car actually crept out in a crawl. He came out really slowly and crawled down to the grassy knoll. So all of the timing is altered. So here's how they altered it. In this frame, you see the proper relationship of the objects in the background, in particular this tree over here is very important. This tree and this corner of the porch and this post and the sign. These are your visual references in how your brain uses Gestalt perception to create an idea. Now look at this next frame. Okay, I'm going back to show you the 3. Remember where the tree was? Remember where the porch is in this first one. Now look. The tree and the porch are still in the same place, relative position. You see?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. However, what's happened to the bottom?
Yeah.
The bottom has shifted. You see the tree? The tree trunk, which was from branches to the ground intact here. The tree trunk is cut off over here. The bottom half, several frames have been removed to make much more of the car appear more rapidly. You see how many lights are here?
Yeah.
2 lights, 2 headlights, right?
Yeah, right.
Notice how much of the car has popped out.
Oh, yeah,
and that's
right.
impossible. In 1/18 of a second,
Right.
this would have to be a launch off an aircraft carrier. If this car was on a catapult on the USS Enterprise and got slung,
from here
that would explain how fast it would have to move from here to here in 1/18 of a second for this much of the car to appear.
Well,
but they want to make you believe that it didn't stop, so this is how the illusion is created. Now we go to the 3rd frame, which restores the tree back to its position. So now the top has shifted very quickly, you see?
Yeah, back.
Okay, so what has been done? Whenever you are, you can do this experiment yourself. Whenever you're in a fast-moving automobile or a bus that's higher up, it's better, or a train, you will look out, and if the train is at speed, any speed, 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, and you look down, you see the ground in front of you, really close to you, is just a blur. You can't make out anything. You go out to the mid-ground, and you can follow things like this. You go into the far background, for example, you guys in Seattle or Mount Rainier, you can ride the highway and take a picture of the car with Mount Rainier in the background. Mount Rainier is going to stay there a good long time, no matter how many miles you're traveling. So this is a given, that things in the far background don't move so quickly or at all for a long time. Things in the foreground move very quickly. So what this does is it has hijacked your perceptions. It has tricked your peripheral vision by juxtaposing these frames and shifting them very rapidly. They created the illusion that the car did not stop. It's an optical illusion.
Yeah,
the car stopped,
and
it crawled out. It crawled out 2 headlights, then 1/4 of the grille, and then 2/3 of the grille, and then these lights. So I would say that between here and here, at least 5 seconds of time have elapsed and have been eliminated to make the car look like it just accelerated right away. It's as if, boom, the president got shot, guy hit the pedal, and he took off. He didn't. He hit the brake, and that's actually what happened.
Wow.
So then the president was shot between the shoulder blades, which made him rise up in the car and say, "Oh my God, I've been shot," which was contested by the Warren Commission interrogators. And they went at it with the Secret Service men who were in the car. As I say, Secret Service men were in the car, driving the car, protecting the president. They know what they heard, and they said, "I heard the president say, 'Oh my God, I've been shot.'" But they protested, "No, you couldn't have heard him because the first shot hit him in the throat and he couldn't have spoken anything." And they said, "No, we heard him say that." And they said, "How can you be so sure?" And he said it with a Boston accent. and that shut up the interrogators, and then they went on to the next bit.
Yeah.
So that was my first contribution, to point out to the world that the Zapruder film was basically a Mickey Mouse cartoon.
Huh, wow.
Literally, into which little marks have been made to make the little girl, for example, she came to a dead stop in her running. Her father called to her and she stopped dead. But because they had to cut out frames at that stop, the same part where the car stopped by the sign, they made her appear to continue running by drawing false legs on her to give her a sense that she was accelerating just like the car was. Let's see, Gestalt editing. Now here is one of my greatest discoveries, and it was a purely scientific discovery. This is a frame from the Zapruder film. It's frame Z295. And in this frame, you can see the vapor trail, a condensation trail left by the bullet that was incoming here. It hit a glancing blow to the top of the head, and basically what we would say skinned him. It skinned the president. It went into the flesh and out of the flesh without going through the skull. And then it came out here, and it's leaving this condensation trail. Now, if you track this bullet goes right into Governor Connolly. So this is one of the back shots that hit Governor Connolly. But it's not a shot that grievously wounded President Kennedy. And this shot was seen by a Secret Serviceman named Glenn Bennett, who was riding on the car behind, so-called Queen Mary, the old presidential vehicle for President Eisenhower. So he saw this glancing blow hit the president, and he said to the Warren Commission, "I saw a shot hit the right side high of the president's head." A strange construct of a sentence, but that's what you see. A bullet striking right side high of the president's head, and then going on, leaving a condensation trail, which if you were to lay a ruler or a straight edge on this, on the entire frame, you would see it goes right into Governor Connolly. So there was a bullet that hit, grazing President Kennedy, hit both men. So that is the fiber of truth underlying the big lie of the magic bullet theory. So my next contribution to the JFK investigation was realizing that this person who is purported to be President Kennedy is not President Kennedy. I call him the Bethesda victim. And who is he? Well, he was somebody who was intimately involved with the plot. And he was this man. This is Officer J.D. Tippit, whom you can see had a rather bad acne problem, and he had a very interesting mole on his ear, right over here. Let me blow it up.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not a stray hair. That's a mole on the ear.
Okay.
And when you look at this fellow here, and we zoom in, moles on the ear.
How about that?
Right there.
Okay.
But notice, I'm going to show you another photo that I believe is even better than this one, where we can see them side by side. I'm very proud of this. It's like a wanted poster, you know? There was a very famous wanted poster for President Kennedy that was laid out all over Dallas. You know? Wanted dead or alive, preferably dead.
Yeah.
Well, here we see Tippit, Officer Tippit, around 1952, and the Bethesda victim. And notice, he really did like this kind of slanted sideburn.
Okay.
That's another thing. If you compare photographs of President Kennedy taken that morning at Love Field in Dallas at the airport, President Kennedy's sideburns go down to about here, and they're straight cut. They don't have this slant cut. So let's look at this very fine nose. Nice sweep. You can see the shadowing on this photograph is excellent because you have shadow and you have light here. And you can see certain two ridges on the nose. One ridge here, very slight. I mean, it's really actually the sweep of the nose. But the sweep of the nose has these two bends here, one here and one here. And they correspond to these two ridges on the nose. Then we have a very fine tip of the nose, very fine nostrils. Under this big lip here, you can feel there are buck teeth under there as they're here. You see?
Okay.
Now, here is part of the discrepancy. The FBI men, who were very astute observers, they observed the body in Dallas and they observed the body when it was taken out in Bethesda, and they remarked that it was obvious that surgery had been performed specifically to the top of the head. Now, my explanation for that is this. President Kennedy had a full head of hair, but Tippit had this receding hairline. And as a result, this had to be altered. So that surgery to the top of the head was to flay some of this skin back and make it appear as if the damage from the bullet had scalped him and taken all the hair away in order to pass off this this victim of the JFK assassination. Let me get another photo over here. Let's see. This is my favorite.
That's it. There, yeah.
Consider this my masterpiece. And this is not computer graphics. Actually, if you look closely up here, you can see a little piece of Scotch tape there where I actually physically had to size up two different size photos of the president on the left side and Tippit on the right side and do ratios to size them up and then slice them as perfectly as I could down a center line to create this composite. And here you see that from the chin up to the brow, let me do this. Here we go. When you forget about the hair, right, which I've explained how that discrepancy was fixed, you can see that these two men bore an uncanny resemblance to each other. This resemblance was so great that the cops on the Dallas Police Department used to rib Tippit and call him Jack and JFK. And that was not a nice thing to be called in Dallas in 1962. Similar thing happened in Dallas all over Texas and the South because President Kennedy was not popular, specifically because of the civil rights issue. So here we have my composite of President Kennedy on the left side and Tippit on the right side. So to familiarize the audience with their features. Now look here. I mentioned before that Officer Tippit had a very fine nose. Here we are seeing President Kennedy's nose, which was much straighter, no ridges, and a bit broader. It was wider rather than the fine tapering nose. You see, right here. It's a very fine nose. President Kennedy's was more rounded, and again, he did not have these ridges. I suspect that Tippit might have been punched in the nose once or twice in his life, and probably more than that. But Tippit is a very strange character. He's a tragic figure in my view of the assassination. I feel for Tippit. He was really a very dedicated, patriotic, loyal American who was confounded by politics and led like a scapegoat. You know, like Oswald, he was a patsy as well. He was drawn into the assassination plot. I have identified him as badge man. I have identified him as the shooter on the grassy knoll. And he was a member of the John Birch Society. He met the previous week in Jack Ruby's Carousel Club with Jack Ruby. Oswald was there. And the head of the John Birch Society in Dallas, which was none other than H.L. Hunt. H.L. Hunt, the mega millionaire, the oil baron, he funded the John Birch Society. So one of the files that came out this week is a report to the FBI that Tippit, Ruby, Oswald, and the head of the John Birch Society had met in Jack Ruby's Carousel Club the week before, on November 14th. Now, 6 days before that, there was a party at the Carousel Club attended by Lyndon Johnson, Madeline Brown, his mistress, and Jack Ruby was there. And Jack Ruby came over to the table and showed off that he already had the motorcade route map. Remember, November 8th, that's 14 days, 2 weeks exactly from the assassination. Jack Ruby already had the map of the motorcade route, and he was showing off. And Madeline Brown said to him, "Boy, Jack, you're really in good with the Great White Fathers," which was a reference to basically the cabal that organized and funded President Kennedy's assassination. They were the highest-ranking Freemasons. And it included H.L. Hunt, Sid Richardson, Clint Murchison, J. Edgar Hoover, Lyndon Johnson, the Dealey brothers who published the Dallas Morning News, Robert L. Thornton, whose name is on an expressway down there. So here is the sounds of New York City news, folks. This is the way it sounded on November 22nd, 1963, as the sirens wailed through Dallas. So let me go on. Let's see what other interesting photos I have here. Really gruesome, folks, but this is the reality of what happened. What entered here was an explosive bullet, and if some of the effects of which you've seen in the Zapruder film, which is the explosion and the expansion of a cloud of blood and brain tissue. But this is the only real picture. All the other pictures that I have seen are those of Officer Tippit. So let me leave this ghastly subject here. Let you take a look at this photograph once more and ask yourself, does this make sense? Could this be true? Can I believe what I'm seeing? Well, I say seeing is believing, folks. Yeah. And now I've explained to you the various differences and discrepancies. There are many, many more. Yeah. But we have a short time, and I would like to now stop sharing screens and turn to my dear friend Donald Grahn.
Oh, yeah.
And I thank you for having me on the show, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Tippit goes there. Even a guy named Frank Sturgis, who is laying claim to being one of the shooters, I guess, he was saying that they use body doubles a lot.
See, all of this came out in the last couple of years, but it's something, you know, I've been telling people this since 1994, 95. It's very hard to believe. But let me just say this, and I'm going to take credit for it. I have broken the cover-up, but more importantly, what I have broken is the mind control apparatus that has been exercised on the American public for 54 years. If you believe what you see in the Zapruder film is real, then you're no better off than a bunch of munchkins in Oz. I pulled away the curtain from The Wizard of Oz. I've explained to the public how the wizardry was done to confound us, to confuse us, and to turn us against each other. That is the worst part of it, the effect that this had in dividing us. And through that divide and conquer process, by keeping this controversy alive rather than letting it rest, it has created a constant turmoil. But I'm happy to say that with the new files, what do the new files say? The most important one for me is the one that says that an FBI informant wrote to the FBI, informed them that in the right-wing community, the John Birch Society, it was given that Officer Tippit was the assassin, and that's the word they use, that Oswald shot Officer Tippit, who was the actual assassin of President Kennedy. So this is a huge paradigm shift, folks, for us to contemplate the idea. Now, think about this. Oswald, the patsy, the loner, the lone nut, the evil villain, he shot the man who shot President Kennedy. And he shot him in self-defense because Oswald knew that he had been set up to be the patsy. So this cop comes up to him, and he knows this cop is there to kill him. So Oswald draws out his gun, if it was Oswald. The fact is, it wasn't. Oswald was already in the theater watching the movie called War is Hell. Another very interesting item that has come out in these files is an eyewitness report of a man who was in the theater, sitting watching the movie, saw Oswald come in and sit down next to a certain person that was in the theater. He then saw him move to another seat. Then another man walked into the theater and sat next to him. This is all in the dark while this war movie is running. And the man sits next to him in a totally practically empty theater. You know, maybe there were like 6 people in it. So this guy sits next to him, and he takes a look at him, and the guy looks at him, and he gets this look like, oh, you're the wrong person. So the guy got up and walked over to another seat. He reported to the FBI that was Jack Ruby.
Really?
In the theater.
Oh,
where
really?
Oswald was arrested.
Huh.
So now we have Jack Ruby in Dealey Plaza delivering rifles at 11:30 a.m. We had a person that looked like Jack Ruby at the Tippit murder site, where one of them was a stocky man who ran away and somebody drove off in a gray car. Ruby had a gray car. And then we have this, that he was at the movie theater and he mistook some person who was sitting there expecting it to be Oswald, sat down next to him and looked at him, and then moved on looking for Oswald. So there we have the key figure. A man who's been made to look, again, like another lone nut, a totally over-emotional character who said that he shot Oswald because he had killed such a fine man like President Kennedy. But when you realize that Tippit, his nickname was Jack
Kennedy, yeah.
JFK,
Right.
or President Kennedy, Ruby is talking about he's mad at Oswald because he killed Tippit, not because he killed President Kennedy. It's all code words and all deception.
Yeah.
Spy versus spy, just like the Mad magazines that we used to read. Mad magazine had cartoons all along the edges and down the middle and in the creases, and you'd have to turn the magazine sideways, upside down to get the whole story. Well, that spy versus spy story is basically what was happening. And just to finish off, I don't know how much time we have, but they also depicted Oswald as the lone nut, single member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Remember that?
Oh,
He
yes.
was handing out pamphlets with the father of Senator Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz Sr. Well, Judith Vary Baker was there, and she saw him, and she says, yeah, that was Ted Cruz's father. However, here's the thing. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee that they tried to make a one-man organization was vast. I have found all of these documents that say the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was operating in Dallas, in New Orleans, in Tampa, in Miami, and was conducting attacks on Cuba, on Castro, trying to kill him, blowing the Esso refinery April 26th of 1963.
Really?
Yes, and President Kennedy, pardon the expression, blew his stack. Because these people were endangering the agreement that he had made with Premier Khrushchev to resolve the missile crisis. Mm-hmm. And they were putting us again in danger of another missile crisis with Khrushchev.
Yeah.
So what President Kennedy did is he ordered the FBI to shut down all the anti-Castro Cuban training camps in Florida, in No Name Key in the Florida Keys, and in Lake Pontchartrain. So then he sent in helicopter gunships to blow them away. He arrested all of them, and he told the FBI to arrest all the Americans who were funding them, supplying them, and facilitating their attacks. And you know who that was?
No.
Take a big guess.
Johnson? Go ahead.
Actually, I'll make it easy. These attacks, some of these attacks were being mounted by power boats, motorboats that were armed with explosives and weapons, and they were taking off from the oil drilling platforms owned by Zapata Oil and George Bush, who was a front man for the CIA.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, Bush.
And he was commander. He was also commander of the Bay of Pigs invasion. He had funded it. He had bought the ships, the Houston and the Barbara, whom he named after his wife. The thing collapsed, and nobody lost more prestige in the CIA than George Bush did that day when the Bay of Pigs failed.
Oh, wow.
So he kept fighting, and he kept sending the patrol boats to attack Cuba after the agreement with Castro. So President Kennedy told the FBI, arrest all of these rogue CIA agents who are doing this. Arrest all of those down there that are running the anti-Castro operations in Miami. And so from April through November 22nd, Lyndon Johnson was on the run because he was going to be impeached.
Right.
But a very large contingent of rogue CIA agents who were in control of JM Wave and ZR Rifle and the anti-Castro Cuban movement, they were on the run from the FBI because they had gone rogue. They had disobeyed the orders of the President of the United States and were putting the country at risk of another nuclear confrontation with Russia. So both George H.W. Bush and Lyndon Johnson had to be sure that by November 22nd, Lyndon Johnson was president to save both their necks.
Yeah, that's right. Very political that way. Yeah. Who exactly did kill Kennedy then? I mean, you saw bullet marks and things. So.
Well, I'll give you the list of names I believe in. Tippit was on the grassy knoll, and he put one of the shots in President Kennedy's head. Frank Sturgis, also self-proclaimed, was involved, and he also acknowledges that Sturgis, were body doubles used to get away with it. There was a French assassin. This French professional assassin, his name was Jean Soutre, and he came into the United States. He was in Dallas that day, and 2 days later, the Secret Service escorted Jean Soutre to the airport and deported him without a word to anyone. This was discovered many, many years later. In the early 2000s, an author named Brad O'Leary wrote a book called Triangle of Death. And in it, he concentrated on the French connection to the JFK assassination. It was a very big connection.
Wow.
So Jean Soutre was shooting from the grassy knoll. Charles Nicoletti, the Daltex building, had an office on the third floor that was just below Zapruder's office, and I believe that that was the one who put a shot in the back between the shoulder blades. And then there were shooters on top of the county records building, which houses the sheriff's office. And they were part of the anti-Castro contingent.
Wow. But you think that Tippit was in the grassy knoll, really? I heard that
he was on duty. He was on duty, but he gave false reports as to where he was.
Okay.
He missed calls. He reported that he was in certain places when he was in other places. He stopped his car a couple of times to make very frenzied phone calls. He also stopped cars on the road there looking for Oswald, apparently, because Oswald was supposed to be killed at the Texas School Depository. He was supposed to be captured and killed there. But when he eluded them and it was found out that he had not been had there, then they went into a frenzy, is what I describe Tippit's actions as.
Okay.
And he was caught up in the intrigue, but never did he realize that he was the getaway vehicle. Never did he realize that his body was going to be used, and that it's precisely because he was called Jack and JFK,
right,
and his appearance was so like JFK's, that someone very high up in the cabal, in the assassination cabal, realized we can get away with it by using this guy. Because if we have a body that's shot from the back at a high angle, from the front at a low angle, from the right side, from the front through the head, and any other number of places, it could never have been argued to be a single gunman. But by providing Tippit, who was shot through the brain with one bullet by a single gunman,
in the right temple, right?
Pardon me?
In the right temple?
Yes, in the right temple.
Right where
it entered and it traversed his brain and hit the back of the skull, but it didn't exit and it fell back in. And in the early black and white photographs of the back of the head wound, you can see that it's actually a depression. It's not an entry wound. It's a depression where the scalp has fallen into the hole that beveled the skull.
Yeah.
And you can see the hair still growing out of that scalp.
I understand Tippit was taken down by a shot to the belly or something like that, and then they hit him in the forehead when he was on the ground, so that behind his head.
He had to position the gun at that angle because they had to have a brain that was as I say, surgically assassinated to fit the scenario that they needed and the specimen.
Because I think Tippit was shot, I think, just after that press conference where they reported to that right temple there, and so that was quite, and that was deliberate. And who shot Tippit then?
One of the purported assassins has been named as Gordon Liddy.
Liddy?
Gordon Liddy was one of them. I believe that Jack Ruby was the other.
Right.
Were one of the teams that pulled this off.
That's right.
That was E. Howard Hunt, Bernard Barker, L. Gordon Liddy, Felix Rodriguez, and they were a part of the plot.
Oh, okay. Well, this has sure been fascinating. So
thank you.
And we covered a lot of bases, Robert. So you have a good Thanksgiving and a wonderful time back to in
God
New York.
bless you and everyone listening. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I have to say to everyone, the saddest Thanksgiving of my life was the Thanksgiving that came the week after President Kennedy was killed.
Oh, yeah.
And I can say that this is a happy Thanksgiving for me because the American public knows the truth.
Yeah.
And we don't need any more files. So, thank you, Don.
Yeah, so I'll say thank you, and we're out of here. So, and God bless you, and
bye.
Take care. Bye. I wasn't called for duty on that day.